When I stepped outside that morning, I didn't expect to find my car keyed from front to back. The deep gouges in the paint weren't the result of some random act of vandalism. No, this was deliberate, a message. And I knew exactly who sent it. It wasn't just about my car. It was about control. And if they thought they could intimidate me, they were dead wrong. This wasn't over. Independence Ridge was one of those picture-perfect suburban neighborhoods. Rows of immaculate lawns, driveways lined with identical mailboxes, and homes painted in the same approved shades of beige. On the surface, it was idyllic. Beneath that, a dictatorship. The HOA ran everything from the color of your curtains to the number of plants allowed in your front yard. And the woman behind it all? Karen Whitmore, the HOA president. She was the kind of person who could turn a slightly overgrown lawn into a scandal, the kind who'd fine you for leaving a garbage can out for 5 extra minutes. And she had a loyal army of rule enforcers, including her husband, Tom. For years, I kept my head down, followed the rules, and ignored the drama. Then, I made a mistake. I put a bumper sticker on my car. It was a simple one, live free or die, a nod to my independent streak. I didn't think much of it. But Karen? She saw it as an act of defiance. The next morning, I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to start my day. Then I saw it. My luxury sedan, freshly washed just the day before, was now covered in deep, jagged scratches that ran from the front fender to the back. I froze. Then, my gaze landed on my security camera. I went inside, pulled up the footage, and hit play. At 2:17 a.m., a figure in a hoodie crept onto my driveway. They hesitated, glancing around, before pulling out a key. For the next 2 minutes, they meticulously dragged the key along the car's paint, ensuring every inch of the driver's side was thoroughly scarred. Then, as they turned toward the streetlight, the camera caught a glimpse of their face. It was Tom, Karen's husband. I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it. The same guy who once lectured me about my trash bins was now out here, sneaking around like a petty criminal. I didn't get mad. I got even. The monthly HOA meeting was held at the community center, a dull room with folding chairs and a long table where Karen and her board presided like a royal court. I showed up early, took my seat, and waited. Karen stood at the front, flashing her usual plastic smile. Before we begin, does anyone have new business to discuss? I raised my hand. Karen's smile faltered. Go ahead. I stood, holding up my phone. I woke up yesterday to find my car had been keyed. Luckily, my security cameras caught the whole thing. The room fell silent. I let that hang in the air for a second before I continued. The footage clearly shows Tom Whitmore doing it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red. Her eyes darted toward Tom, who was sitting in the back, suddenly very interested in his shoes. That's ridiculous, she snapped. There's no way my husband would. I tapped my phone, playing the video. Tom, in all his late-night vandalizing glory, appeared on the screen. The room went dead silent. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. I'm not here to cause drama. I just want my car fixed and an apology. If that happens, we can forget the whole thing. Karen's eyes narrowed. You think you can blackmail us? This is slander. I smirked. It's not slander if it's true. I held up my phone. But hey, if you'd rather settle this in court, that's fine by me. I've already spoken to my attorney. A long, uncomfortable silence followed. Finally, one of the other board members cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a recess and discuss this privately. Karen stormed out, dragging Tom behind her. As I walked out of the meeting, neighbors stopped me, whispering their support. It's about time someone stood up to them. We've had enough of their power trips. I just smiled and nodded. Inside, though, I was already planning my next move. This wasn't just about fixing my car anymore. This was about sending a message. Later that night, I sat at my desk, making a list. Step 1, get the car repaired. Step 2, hold the HOA accountable. Step 3, make sure Karen and her cronies never pull something like this again. This was just the beginning. The HOA thought they could push people around without consequences. They were wrong. And I was about to prove it. The morning after the HOA meeting, I made a trip to my lawyer's office. James Calloway, my attorney, was a no-nonsense type of guy who thrived on cases like this. When I showed him the footage and explained the situation, he leaned back in his chair, a slow smirk forming on his face. They messed with the wrong person, he said. We're not just going after Tom. We're going to shake the entire HOA. He filed a formal complaint for property damage and harassment, making sure the police had everything they needed to move forward. But I knew the legal battle would take time. I wasn't going to sit back and wait. If Karen and her crew thought they could bully the neighborhood into silence, I was about to change the game. Step 2 of my plan was turning the neighborhood against them. I started digging into the HOA's finances, talking to neighbors who had been hit with ridiculous fines. It didn't take long to find something interesting. The HOA had been issuing fines for violations that didn't exist, and worse, they had been funneling money into a special project fund, one that seemed to have no actual projects attached to it. It wasn't just an abuse of power. It was embezzlement. I compiled every shady document, every unjust fine, and put together an anonymous expose. I printed out hundreds of copies and distributed them across the neighborhood, slipping them into mailboxes, taping them to street lamps, and even leaving stacks at the community center. By the end of the week, people weren't just angry. They were furious. And Karen? She was desperate. With pressure mounting, Karen called for an emergency meeting. Her goal? To control the damage and convince people the accusations were false. But when she stepped up to the podium, she was met with hostile glares. "Is it true you've been stealing from us?" one man shouted. "Why have I been fined for having a mailbox 1 inch too tall?" another neighbor demanded. Karen stammered, her face pale, as people started calling for her resignation. And then, to top it all off, 2 police officers walked in. They headed straight for Tom. "Mr. Whitmore, you're under arrest for vandalism and harassment." Tom barely had time to react before they slapped handcuffs on him. Karen screamed as her husband was let out, but no one came to her defense. The power she once had, gone. With Tom arrested and the corruption exposed, the remaining HOA board members began resigning one by one. No one wanted to go down with Karen. A month later, the board was dissolved, the HOA disbanded, and every ridiculous fine they had issued was legally overturned. Karen? She moved out of the neighborhood in disgrace. And just like that, Independence Ridge was finally free. For the first time in years, people could breathe again. No more HOA tyranny. No more pointless fines. Just a real community, free from control. As I walked past Karen's now empty house, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I hadn't just won. I had taken back my home. And if anyone ever tried to pull something like this again, they'd know exactly who they were dealing with.